Good morning and welcome to the July meeting of the Planning Committee. My name is Councillor Jonathan Vinehall and I'm Chairman of the committee. This meeting is being held remotely and is being live streamed via YouTube. The recording of this will be available after on our website. Councillors and officers are reminded to put their mobile phones on silent and if they have one near them, and to remove any other phone. Committee members only leave their cameras on and mute their microphones when not speaking, as this will reduce feedback and background noise and saves bandwidth and potential loss of connection. The first thing I'll do is a roll call of all members who are expected to attend. Could I please have you call your name out after I've identified you? Make sure you turn your microphone on. So we're going to do that right now. Councillor Mary Barnes.
Present.
Councillor Sam Coleman.
Present.
I should have said Councillor John Barnes, who's substituting for Councillor Gary Curtis.
Present.
Councillor Sarah Errington.
Present.
Councillor Tony Ganley.
Present.
Councillor Kathy Harmer.
Present.
Councillor Jonathan Johnson.
Present.
Councillor Lynn Langlands.
Present.
Councillor Chris Madeley.
Present.
Councillor Andrew Mear.
Present.
Councillor Jeanette Stevens.
Present.
Councillor Richard Thomas.
Present.
And I've been missed off again.
Pardon?
Councillor Prochak, I've been missed off again.
You have, Councillor Prochak. Goodness me.
Present.
That's an oversight. And I believe we may have Councillor Cortell with us today. Yes? No?
Present, but I'll be returning for item 9, Devonshire Square, and leaving the meeting until then.
Good. All right. And I also believe we have Councillor Bayliss, who will be speaking on that same application.
Yes, that's correct.
All right. Also joining us today are Tim Hickling, who's Head of Strategy and Planning, Sam Batchelor, Development Manager, Jeff Pyra, who is a Team Leader and North Bexhill Manager, and Amy Fern, who is a Housing and Asset Development Officer. There are 2 technical staff in the meeting who are helping to operate the live broadcast and deal with any technical difficulties that might occur. Democratic Services Officer and the committee clerk today is Julie Hollands. And I would just make a few more notes. Members of the committee will be making their decisions today by a named vote. So at the appropriate time, Julie will call out each member's name and be asked to answer either for, against, or abstain. Please do remember to turn your microphones on and preferably just before you're about to be asked, to avoid that little delay. Because of this new format, we're encouraged to make our comments succinctly and pertinently. I'm sure we do that all the time anyway. It just helps the meeting to run a little more smoothly. However, I should also say that if a member loses connection, I will stop the meeting for a couple of minutes to enable the connection to be restored. If we can't restore that connection, then the meeting will proceed and that member may not be allowed to vote and should identify themselves at that time. Those members who wish to speak, can you please indicate by typing your surname in the chat facility? Please only use the chat facility for that purpose, as any inappropriate use would be deemed to be a potential code of conduct matter. I will ask members who have asked a question if they wish to come back after receiving a response, so there's no need to type your name in again. There are no registered speakers today. It is a requirement that all members have read the paperwork published on the website. We may stop for a comfort break if necessary, but please, if we do, don't press the leave the meeting button, just turn off your cameras and microphones. Everything will be done in the order shown on the papers, and also, as always, be aware that there can be a short delay between being asked to speak and you actually coming online. So on that basis, I will start.
Sorry to interrupt you. Just to let you know that we do have 2 other members joining us today. That's Councillor Howard Norton and Councillor Doug Oliver as well.
Good, thank you very much and welcome to the meeting. So the first item on the agenda is the minutes. Could I have your authorisation to sign the minutes of the meeting of the 18th of June? I just need a proposer and a seconder, unless there's...
Councillor Prochak, move.
Could I have a seconder, please?
Councillor
Lynn
Coleman.
Langland,
Oh, there we go.
second.
Okay, we have two there. We have apologies from Councillor Curtis, already heard, and Councillor Barnes will be standing in for Councillor Curtis. I don't believe there are any additional items. Mr. Hickling, are there any additional items that may have occurred?
None to add, Chairman.
All right, thank you very much. Withdrawn applications. We do have a withdrawn application, which is the Bexhill Little Common Recreation Ground. That's application 296P. So we won't be doing that. Can I have any disclosures of interest, please? Any disclosures of interest? No? All right, well,
Yes, myself, Councillor Mear. It's not so much a declaration of interest, but I do want to explain that I live nearby to the Market Garden site, item number 7, which is at Fairlight. And I have been involved with the site over a period of years and have expressed various views. Though circumstances, time and policies change, and I believe I bring a clear mind to it now. And I will be listening with great care to what others say.
thank you very much. I will be asking you to speak first on that application and last as the ward member. So on that basis, we will move on to the first application, which is RR2017/457/P, and this is Fairlight, former Market Garden, Lower Waits Lane. So I'm going to hand over to our officer, Sam Batchelor. Are you going to present this, Sam?
I am. Good morning.
Good morning and welcome.
Thank you. So just bear with me whilst I get set up. Good morning, members. Okay, so can we see the slideshow this morning? Confirmation. Yep, confirmation for one person is enough. I think.
Yeah, I can see it.
Right, let's get going then. So yes, an application in 2017 was submitted for 16 houses on the former Market Garden site in Fairlight. That was actually resolved to be approved at Planning Committee in 2018. At the time that the application was approved, it had already been subject of some viability considerations because the applicant had flagged up that there were issues with bringing forward affordable housing on the site. At the time, that was checked by the District Valuation Service, who I think disagreed slightly with the assumptions made by the applicant at the time, said that there was a residual amount of money that could go towards some affordable housing. So further negotiations were undertaken, and what was secured at the time was 6 shared ownership units. Now, during the time after that, so essentially during the production of the legal agreement, the matters were reviewed by the applicant, who considered actually that the situation had become worse from a viability point of view, and therefore submitted further information in relation to costs. Now, I appreciate this actually might not necessarily come across quite clearly in the report. It's not just build costs. It was review of gross development costs. So as is explained in the attachments that come that were online with the application, that includes the build costs for the development, the benchmark land value, also values, and bear with me because the other bit escapes me for a second, and house prices as well. So those were all put rather to the DVS, this time to an organisation called Altair, because unfortunately the DVS don't have a lot of a capacity to help with our viability at the moment, so we go out and get professional advice from some other organisations. They reviewed those assumptions that the developer had made in terms of the build costs, benchmark land value, profit levels and house prices, and whilst they didn't agree with the specific values that the developer had put forward, particularly in terms of construction costs and benchmark value. If we focus on something like construction costs, for example, they have agreed that there has been an increase in build costs over time, and that together those things, when you recalculate them, actually do have an impact on development viability such that affordable housing cannot be provided in this instance. So that information was provided to Amy Fern, who will join me today for any questions afterwards, who has agreed with that assessment, has commented on the proposals, and they are laid out in the report. But just a couple of additional bits for you. This is the site within Fairlight itself, as you can see, surrounded by some development here, but in the middle, that's the site there. And then actually, just to give you a bit of an idea, because some of you would not necessarily been involved with this scheme previously, this is the block plan as it was approved. And you'll also note in the report that reference is made to the changes in policy that have occurred since it was approved in 2017. And the most obvious things that would apply in this instance are the adoption of our housing standards. And so there are about 2 or 3 policies that relate to that. They include things like minimum floor space, expected minimum garden widths, accessibility and adaptability standards. So in terms of the size of the units, the houses themselves, so the floor space of them, they meet the policies in that respect. In fact, many of the properties are above the minimum requirement. And also we can add conditions with regard to the accessibility standards. And indeed, that is our kind of standard way of doing that since we adopted the policy. What is an issue is the gardens of the units here. And they're spelt out in the report. So there are 5 units then which fall short of the expected minimum 10 metres. On average, they measure about 7 metres, although you'll appreciate from even looking at this plan, each is slightly different. But as explained in the report, given the history of the site, the issues relating to viability, the reuse of a brownfield land, having regard to our housing land supply position, and essentially what the MPPF says in terms of kind of assessing those things in the round, it's still considered that there is support for the scheme. So the recommendation now is for approval, still subject to a 106, but without the affordable housing requirement and just the requirements for the highways improvements and I believe reptile relocation. Thank you.
Oh.
I think we've temporarily lost the chairman. I'm sure he'll be getting himself back in again in a moment.
We've lost sound, Jonathan.
Could we continue with the deputy chairman?
I think, Councillor Ganley, we said that what we would do is wait a couple of minutes, but if it doesn't, he doesn't come back, I can take over. I'm ready.
I am back.
Okay.
Can you hear me? I am here.
Okay.
We can hear you.
Good. I saw that whole presentation. I could hear everything. So no issues whatsoever. Councillor Meir, as you're the ward member, could you please speak?
First of all, I simply want to ask a straightforward question, and that is that Mr. Batchelor said that this was a brownfield site. The inspector in 2005, 2006 was very clear that it's a greenfield site. It's a former market garden. I don't see how it qualifies as a brownfield site. Can perhaps Mr. Batchelor explain that?
Sam?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Meir. I'm under the impression it's a brownfield site, given my previous understanding, but I can come back to you on that point during the course of the discussion, if you like.
Thank you. May I now address you, Mr. Chairman?
Please.
Yes. First of all, I declare that in the past, and I've mentioned 2005 to 2006, I have argued for deletion of this site. That at that time was on large part on grounds concerning cliff erosion. Those grounds no longer apply since the cliff works were done in 2007. By the time this application was heard by the former committee, I and Fairlight Parish Council had reluctantly accepted Rother's designation of the site for housing. We were opposed to the actual application principally because it was an overdevelopment. Since then, time and policy has moved on, and I'm sure I have too, and my experience has broadened. I believe I can approach this with a fresh mind, and I have to say I now completely accept the allocation of this site for housing. I have to say that this site is the last open space within the built area of Fairlight. It is very, very important to get it right. There is no village green. The public house car park, the garden has been built over. There are plenty of private green spaces, but no public ones. And the recreation ground is on the outskirts of the village. The site has a most unfortunate planning history. It's long been earmarked for housing, and I've mentioned the 2006 public inquiry into the local plan. There were also drainage issues at that stage, and of the objections at that time, the drainage remains a problem, as I shall demonstrate. By 2006, the then government had introduced a minimum density requirement. This is how the site came to be allocated for at least 15 units. That was a flat across the board minimum requirement which existed at that time. The requirement took no account of the locality, local needs, or the nature of the site. The policy was not long after abandoned, but the allocation of at least 15 stuck. I would add that there is a complication in that there are garages marked on the site, you can see. Those garages may originally have been intended to be included within the curtilage of the site, but the developer has been unable to buy out the long leaseholds on those, which has further reduced the size of the site. 16 houses on this site is a very much higher density than the built areas to which it relates. At half a hectare, that is 32 houses per hectare. Councillors will remember that we considered Spindlewood Drive, the other side of Bexhill. That worked out at about 20 houses per hectare. And when we were in a training session not so long ago, the example given from Northamptonshire was about 20 houses per hectare, and we were told that that is fairly normal by modern standards. So the Market Garden site, as proposed, is 50% denser than other sites, and it is wholly inappropriate in this particular location. I'm not just rehearsing old arguments from before, and I have to turn to the present application. The previous committee allowed the development as it was apparently policy compliant. There was the 40% affordable element, which must have weighed heavily with councillors, and the number of houses appeared to be policy compliant. These things have now changed. The affordable element, we are told, cannot be met and is to go. And that is a great disappointment, I'm sure, to all. But there's been another change too. We adopted the DASA earlier this year after it had gone through the government inspection process. And Mr. Batcher has already referred to the garden sizes. The DASA provides for gardens at least 10 metres long. 5 out of the 16 proposed houses fail that standard, and they fail it badly, having only about 7 metres rather than 10 plus. That is the clearest demonstration the site will not acceptably accommodate 16 dwellings. the application is simply not policy compliant. The excessive density spills over into the affordability problem too. Because of ground conditions in Fairlight and because of potential flooding downstream at pet level, and councillors will recall from a previous application that pet level is at flood category 3, the highest level of risk. This all means that our policy that is Rother's policy, is that runoff rates from the site must not exceed greenfield runoff rates. Excuse me. That means there have to be attenuation tanks to hold back water and to discharge it slowly into the neighbouring stream. The more houses, the more roofs and hard surfaces, and the bigger the tanks are needed and the less room there is to accommodate them. This all becomes more difficult, more expensive and less satisfactory. And I would suggest this must impinge on the affordability calculation. And it will also impinge on the saleability of the houses, so it makes a difference to the affordability matter. We are trying to do this to meet a long defunct minimum density requirement which paid no regard to the site. This application is not policy compliant. There is no 40% affordable housing. 5 out of the 16 houses have non-compliant gardens. And I would add that there is nowhere for children to play. There is no nearby play area. There is no handy green space. There is just the road. And the neighbouring roads don't even have pavements. The recreation ground is nearly half a kilometre away. It also fails on the grounds of policy OSS4 in that it detracts from the character and appearance of the locality. Councillors may consider that this is not acceptable. Councillors may feel that the best course of action is for this application to be rejected, but for the developer to go back literally to the drawing board and come forward with a plan which is policy compliant. If the affordable element is still impossible, at least we know where we stand and we will have a development we can be proud of. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, and done nearly to the second of 5 minutes. So thank you very much. Who would like to speak on this? I don't have anyone listed just yet. Anyone like to speak? Am I seeing someone? Yes, Councillor Prochak.
Can I just ask a question? Are we able to reject this application because the application is just about the 106 and the affordable housing? And maybe is it this point we ought to ask Amy Fern to help us? And I just need some advice on that.
So some clarification. This is an application to vary 106, but I think Mr. Batchelor and Amy might like to make comments. I'd also like to hear from Amy as well in terms of what is the current size of our housing list as well.
Okay, Amy, I'll go first just to cover the points about the planning process. In terms, going back to Councillor Mears' question about the brownfield land site, I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to settle that for you, I don't think, as part of this discussion. I can still give you a steer, so an officer view as to how to proceed with the application, but it would appear that horticulture can be greenfield land, and there's case law surrounding that. You know, so it's amazing what you can remind yourself of in the short time of dealing with a planning committee. But it's a matter of fact and degree, and I can't settle on that fact and degree at the moment, given that the history was dealt with previously as part of those other applications. But I take the point that if there was an application in 2005, I think, Councillor Mear, that you said that the inspector classed it as such, then that wouldn't be at odds with the fact that horticulture sites, which include market gardens, can be considered greenfield. So in terms of the overall recommendation, my advice is that it doesn't change, simply on the basis that the viability remains an issue, that it's an allocated site actually, which is the bit that's actually missing from that summary in the report. That, you know, on that basis, there's still a drive to commit to development taking account of the MPPF as a whole. So then turning on to Councillor Prochak's queries about how the application can be assessed today. As it stands, no planning permission has been granted. It was resolved to be approved previously, which I think should weigh heavily in your minds when considering the application, but it hasn't been approved yet. It was resolved to be approved to sort out the 106. It's come back to you now because the 106 hadn't been sorted out and the viability matter has been raised again. But also, as explained in the report, the policy situation has changed, which is why there's a brief section in the report to explain officer view about that policy change. So it is legitimate to consider the scheme as a whole, but I think the focus that I've tried to provide is that the situation is not considered to have changed significantly, such that any alternative decision should be made, although I appreciate that members might come to a different view. And Councillor Vinehall, you had a question for Amy?
I did. Well, before I repeat that, Councillor Prochak, are you happy with that response? Is there any other question you have?
I just want, I mean, what Councillor Meir has said has quite coloured the application for us. I remember this site very well before. I remember the big issue with flooding, and also, but the thing is, if we had, I think I want you to actually tell me whether policy has changed enough for us to say, let's go back to the drawing board with this one.
Sam?
So, I mean, it's not a yes or no answer. The policy has changed. We have adopted the development and site allocations plan, but the officer recommendation is clear that in that you should still, the recommendation is that the application should still be approved. But the things from my perspective that are significantly different to that was assessed previously are the housing standard policies, because policies relating to drainage, our understanding of the location of development within Fairlight itself and what that means in terms of the context, so like the surrounding style and character and density, none of those things have changed. And there were policies within the previous local plan, the 2006 version, and the core strategy, which is currently adopted, that still covered those elements as well. And the DASA only expands on those. It doesn't change policy in terms of our assessment of character significantly, expands on those. They're development management specific policies, but there's the core strategy sets an overarching way of assessing planning applications, and that still existed at the time of the 2017 application, so not much has changed there. And picking up on the point specifically about the gardens, yes, we endeavour to meet those minimum garden sizes where we can, but the policy is worded as such that whilst we don't routinely accept smaller gardens, it's not a minimum requirement. It's a minimum that should be achieved where it can. And in the round, kind of as summarised as briefly as possible in the report, my advice to the committee is that the shortfall of the 5 units that don't meet that is not sufficient to refuse the application in this instance.
Thank you. There is Amy was going to answer the question. What is our current housing list?
Good morning, councillors. So in terms of housing need, as you're all aware, there is significant unmet housing need across the district. There's over 1,500 people on the housing register, but that's for affordable rented tenures, social rented tenures alone. We also have an unmet need for those requiring low-cost home ownership options, which was partly why a decision was taken previously to grant the permission based on 6 shared ownership units. That was to maximise on-site delivery to meet as closely as possible our planning policy requirement of on-site affordable housing, but also in part to try and improve slightly the viability position as well. But it's worth saying that the scheme was always marginally or only marginally viable it was looking to provide 37.5% affordable housing provision as opposed to 40%. So there was no commuted sum element in addition to the shared ownership. So as I say, it was only ever marginally viable. And the applicant has then obviously since come back and contested on a number of points relating to values, profit margin, build costs and benchmark land value as the areas where costs have increased overall to make the scheme unviable. So it feels unusual to be sitting on this side of the fence. Obviously my role is to maximise and secure affordable housing provision. But unfortunately, I think in this case, it would appear that a scheme as it presents is not viable to deliver any on-site provision of affordable housing.
We have 5 members who wish to speak, but I just wanted to ask a few more questions for clarification. How many affordable houses have we delivered in the last year, approximately?
In the last year, so last year was 114 in total.
Yep. Okay. Thank you. And the question to Mr. Batchelor, because I think this is a little unclear in the report, unless I didn't read it properly. So this is not the variation of a signed 106. This is an unsigned 106. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. This hasn't been signed yet, so the application, no 106 has been signed. The application hasn't been determined.
Precisely. All right. Thank you very much. That makes it very clear. I think I do need just to help members to refresh the training that we did on viability in section 106s, because it was very useful in terms of what happens. Now, this is not a variation of the signed 106, therefore you're not looking at it in quite the same way. But one of the things that the legal people pointed out to us was that we weren't completely unfettered in our ability to reject a variation in a 106 within that first 5-year period. The applicant can't take it to appeal. In this case, they can't because it's not signed. But at the same time, we do have to consider whether the section 106 or the proposed 106 still has a useful purpose. And in the case of talking about affordable housing, that is determining whether we still have unmet needs. So I think there should be that consideration when we're discussing this as well. It's quite a little more complicated application than it appears. So the first on the list to speak is Councillor Mary Barnes. Could I have Mary, please?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Several questions. First of all, we haven't heard anything about the road layout. I was actually on that first site visit back in 2018, and it struck me that the bus had a very tortuous journey to get to the site. The roads are very, very narrow. Looking at the proposal for the number of dwellings intended, it's quite obvious that this is going to bring quite a number of people, about 21, 22 people into the site. If all those people have cars and added to the presumably the parking arrangements that the existing garages are going to have, it's going to mean quite a difficult junction getting out onto Smugglers Lane. So my first question is, how has that been designed so that allows easy access, not only for those people, but also for all the transport that will be going in and out of the site? The other thing I wanted to ask about was, oh gosh, it's gone out of my mind. What on earth was it? No, let's just concentrate on that one first. It's the access. And how, oh yes, I know what the other thing was. I would like to make certain that if the houses are built, that they retain the garages that are actually on the design. We are hearing too many developments where the garages disappear. I would like to make that a condition that the garages stay, if that is going to be allowed. Personally, I was very persuaded by the argument put forward by Councillor Meir about the unsuitability of this site as a large-scale development area. And I would actually rather hope that if it does go back to the drawing board, that we do have some kind of promise that the developer will talk to the local community. I don't think we can ever stop that being a development site, but I think it would be quite a good idea to let the local community come in and take part in the discussion about what would be allowed on the site. Hopefully a reduced number of houses, but also design, layout, and the type of houses that they would willingly see built there. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Batchelor, would you like to respond?
Thank you, Chairman. With regard to the transport and access issues, they're as set out in the original report from the previous planning committee, which is section 6.9. I'll try and get a page number for you. Just bear with me a second. So I've got that on my agenda as page 33. Well, it's page 31 at the bottom of the document, but it's page 33 if you're looking at the PDF number. But I mean, generally speaking, just to cover the points that you've raised about, how does the access work? Has it, been taken into account in terms of the types of vehicles and type of movements that would be made? Well, yes, is the short answer to that, because that was what would have been assessed previously. It was also a major development because it's 16 units. So the appropriate consultation would have occurred with the Highway Authority. And that section of the previous report kind of summarises those issues there, really. So I don't think really there's much more that I can say about that. I've just been trying to flick through as well and just see if there's already a condition that's suggested in the previous report about garages. But certainly if there isn't, then we can ensure that one is added. So were you to vote on the scheme, that's something that can be added. And I don't see that as being unreasonable. That sounds, quite pertinent from the way that you just described it anyway, so that's fine. And then just to pick up on the comment that you made about, having listened to the address by Councillor Meir, and, the possibility that, if the scheme goes back to the drawing board, I think perhaps I just need to put a stronger emphasis on the fact that the site is allocated for 16 units as proposed in this scheme. And if anything, to a certain degree, it's fair to say that the policy that we've adopted is a reflection of the scheme that was approved, because it's from the way that it's set out in the policy map that's been provided, the amount of units that are in there, it's all on the basis that it's in line with this scheme that we've approved. That's notwithstanding the issues that have already been identified, like the gardens, which still need to be taken into account. But all I can say in that respect is that it's as set out in the report, and I'm of the view that the balance is such that the scheme should still be approved. So yeah, that's me for those points.
Does that sufficiently satisfy your question, Councillor Barnes?
Yes, thank you. I can hear the answers coming back. I'm not particularly happy about it.
Well, that's your choice.
Yes, I accept what he said. It'd be interesting just to hear what everyone else is thinking.
And just before I move to Councillor Barnes, I do want you to clarify, Sam, is it 5 or 6 affordable houses? Of course, at point 1.2 in the report, it says 4 of one and 2 of another, which is 6. And then at point 1.16, it talks about 5 affordable houses. So is it 5 or 6?
It's 6 affordable units. The other reference is, and I appreciate that it's not actually written clearly enough, given that the question's being raised, that's actually reference to the 5 units that have the shortfall with the garden space.
Oh, all right, thank you very much. Councillor John Barnes. Councillor John Barnes. Oh, you haven't frozen up again, have you? Can you hear me? Councillor John Barnes.
Yes. Chairman.
Yes, Councillor Barnes. You're a little bit. The reception is not so good.
Because the...
He can't hear you.
We can't hear you, John.
Hello?
Oh,
moving.
I think you may need to sort of start again because they're not hearing you.
I can hear you, Jonathan.
yeah,
You can't hear me.
Can I suggest you take somebody else for a moment, and I'll come back in a moment.
Absolutely. Councillor Errington. Councillor Errington?
Thank you. Just an observation, really. This was agreed in March 2018, and 2 years later, we're still discussing it. I just wonder, is that normal for developers not to start things immediately? Bearing in mind they have got 3 years to start, haven't they? But we are 2 years into that 3 years, and now the viability has come up again. It's just an observation. Sam can't speak for the building company, but I just wondered what's been happening in those 2 years.
So the developer actually haven't, their 3 years haven't started yet because we actually haven't issued them a planning permission. It was resolved to be approved at planning committee subject to the legal agreement being signed and agreed. So, but because we haven't done that yet, we haven't actually issued it. So, I mean, your time scale question is still relevant in so much as if they wanted to get on with the development, and maybe it would have been entered to very quickly and got on site. Yeah. But that also said, viability was clearly an issue from them from the outset, and they've ummed and ahed about it, and here we are.
Yes, indeed, ummed and ahed. The other thing is paragraph 3.1 regarding the sill. And again, it's more of a statement, and I don't expect an answer, but it says, in regards to SEAL, is subject to change, including a possible exemption. And we're talking about £233,000 possibly exempt. Would all of it be exempt?
So the likelihood is no. But it's just a caveat that's put into the report because exemptions can be claimed, for example, if development was self-build or if later along the lines it became an exclusively affordable housing development. As it stands, because they're getting rid of the affordable housing from a developer applicant point of view, it's a market scheme which would be subject to full seal. But if they strangely sold it and everyone had a plot and it was a self-build plot, then there might be exemptions that applied there. Or similarly, if a registered provider purchased it and then they were all affordable housing, then an exemption might be applicable there. But,
thank you very much.
Councillor, what I'm going to ask is that Councillor Meir has put his name in, but I'm just going to ask, was that for a clarification or did you want to say something? If it's just for clarification, that's good, but otherwise I'll keep you to the end. We can't hear you. Your microphone is off.
I apologise. I simply wanted to clarify a couple of things which Councillor Mary Barnes had raised, just to avoid misunderstandings. One is about the garages. The garages marked on the site are not part of the development.
No, I understand that.
They are held on long leases by others, and which the developer says they have been unable to buy out those long leases. So that those garages are not part of the development site. They're not within the. I don't think they're within the red line. So that's not part of it. There are parking places provided, but not garages.
Okay.
All right, thank you very much.
The other point was the position of highways. Highways can't say a lot about this particular application because they're unadopted roads. It is surrounded by unadopted roads, and highways doesn't have the usual controls and jurisdiction over that. So I'm given to understand that highways aren't terribly happy, but they can't say anything.
Chairman, Chairman, I'm now in a position to speak.
All right. Did you want to say, is that all, Councillor Meir? Yes. Okay, thank you. Councillor Barnes, please.
Yes, Chairman, I am taking it that because of the significant change in the application and the fact that the original planning permission was not completed, that we are entitled to look at this in terms of current policy. I have to say I'm rather with Councillor Meir on this one, that you cannot resist this as a housing site, but I'm not sure we should be bound by the 16. It seems to me that our views on what is minimum standards have changed, and although this meets it on the housing, it doesn't really meet it on other aspects, and it most certainly doesn't respect the overall density and design of the area. And therefore, I must say, I think if I were looking at this totally afresh, I would be saying this is overdevelopment on this site. I'm also very unhappy about the access. I understand why highways can't rule, but I have to say highways in effect are saying they could never adopt this. And it does seem to me that we are actually putting a large amount of traffic onto roads which were not designed to bear it. I think if I were really looking at this with fresh eyes, and I am in a sense, because I was not a member of the planning committee when you last looked at this, this would smack to me of overdevelopment for the area, for the roads, and in every way I would favour housing on this site, but not this number of units.
I'm going to thank you very much, Councillor Barnes. I'm going to ask Sam Batchelor the question here. Sam, I can't remember the High Court judgment on this. I would have to look it up. It was a couple of years ago, but my understanding is when a significant amount of time has elapsed from a committee decision to a decision notice, that there is significant precedent for actually bringing that, and there has been change during that time, there is precedent for actually bringing that application back. Can you confirm that or clarify that point?
Yeah, without the details to hand, I'm aware of that should be the approach. Yes, in so much as when an application was resolved to be approved by a previous committee, if a significant period of time has elapsed, because of things that might have changed in material circumstances policy, it may well need to go back again, especially where the case has changed.
And what would be the process for that?
Or something like this, really. In this instance, the application was re-advertised because it was amended with the additional viability information. So there was a publicity element to it as well. And it's now brought before your attention with an update report and the previous committee report explaining from an officer level view what the key differences are. All right.
Okay, so to be actually clear, we're not voting on a change in the section 106. We're actually making a decision to grant planning permission. Is that correct?
Yes, you are being asked to resolve to approve the scheme again.
Right. Yeah, that's good. I just want to be really clear because it's an interesting application. Councillor Langlands. Councillor Langlands.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. There's just three things really. I am very concerned about the gardens and them not being policy compliant. I don't think I would mind so much if it was just a small change, but a 3-metre change is quite considerable as far as I'm concerned. It's a third less really than what would be expected, and that bothers me. And the fact that they actually back on to rather tatty garages that I assume will just stay tatty because I can't see anything being done about that. So that concerns me. I think from a policy compliance point of view, we should really be doing something about that and standing our ground. The other thing was the parking. I hadn't seen anywhere in the report reference to SRM1 from the core strategy, which is towards a low carbon future. I can't see anything anywhere that sort of says, yes, there's going to be electric charging points and things that and what sort of heating system is going to be used. I can't see anything. And in our environment strategy, it's coming forward. I just feel we should be. I mean, last year we declared a climate emergency, we should be looking at that in a little bit more detail, I think, when we come to building these developments, and at least have it mentioned in there. So I'm concerned about that. Parking. I actually, looking at the plans, thought there were garages near some of the houses. Maybe I'm wrong, but if there were, I would suggest they weren't, as Mary Barnes said, kept as garages. They were carports, because garages get filled up when you're short of space with all sorts of clutter, and cars then come out onto the roads and the pavements. So my feeling is, don't give them the option to load it up with anything, make it a carport so it becomes a parking area. But they might not be garages. Actually, perhaps Sam could clarify that. And just the last thing, there was quite a lot of reference to Japanese knotweed on the site. How do we know that that is actually been eradicated? Are there certificates? Are there guarantees? Because clearly mortgage companies would be concerned about that. Perhaps Sam could clarify that for me as well.
Sam.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Councillor Langlands. I don't think there's much more I can say about the gardens. I appreciate the views in relation to that. I can only offer my opinion. Like I've tried to explain, the garden policy is a minimum that should try to be achieved, but it's particularly worded so that it's not a minimum requirement for all planning applications. There is some flexibility within it, and I suppose all I'm advising in that respect is that the flexibility that I'm adopting and that I'm advising the committee about is how it then relates to the wider agenda of trying to deliver housing development. So I've made a judgment in that respect, and that's what's been advised to you. The reference to policy SRM1, which is, about promoting sustainable design, has to be then followed on with, specific policies about how that might be delivered. And members will appreciate we're not there yet. We have declared a climate emergency. We are in the process of, writing a strategy in order to fulfil how the authority may deliver that in the future, which in turn should form part of future planning policies. But as it stands, that policy was applicable when the application was resolved to be approved in March 2018, and nothing's changed from a planning policy point of view. We are, as an authority, moving on, but it hasn't fed its way into that yet. So I don't think that has any bearing in this instance. It's not a reason to, I think, come to an alternative view. I was just trying to find some drawings about the garages on the property, actually, that might help, because I've shown you a block plan in the presentation that I gave you earlier, and you'll note from that some of the units did show a kind of garage carport space, and so just looking at one on my screen here, yes, that is right. Some of those houses do have their own garages, so the condition that Councillor Barnes mentioned would still be applicable. They don't have to be changed to carports, Councillor Langlands, because the condition will be worded such that that's what they should be used for the parking of vehicles only. And so it doesn't matter if they're open carports or garages. Obviously, if they're open carports, the fact they might be used for storage in breach of that condition would be less, because it would be less of a storage space for people. But we do have standard conditions that cover garages too for vehicle use only, so it would still be relevant. And that's what they're designed with at the moment. A few of the properties in the scheme do have garages.
You happy with that, Councillor Langlands?
Yeah, and could you help me with the knotweed issue? Does that, do we need to look into that?
Sorry, I didn't mean to forget that one. I wrote your first list of 3 down and then forgot about your 4th.
Sorry, knotweed.
Yeah, knotweed isn't a planning policy consideration. There's environment. It's covered by the Environment Agency and regulations that they publish. So it's still something that would be dealt with, but essentially it's a pollution issue for all intents and purposes. And so if they are to deal with it on site, they would have to deal with it in an appropriate way, and there's regulations that cover that.
Right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Stevens.
Yes, I'm just I was on this planning application, and it's a real shame that we've lost our affordable houses yet again due to viability. I understand that, but it seems to be happening all the time. Also, I'm not very happy about the size of the gardens on them 5 houses, which is not compliant. And I do agree with Lynn that I think electric charging points in the future should be part of a planning application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If we could now have Councillor Thomas. Councillor Thomas.
Hello, can you hear me now?
We can hear you now.
Okay. Chair, members of the committee, I'd like to start by saying that I think Councillor Meir has presented an excellent summary of the problems with this site. I don't think the case has been made better, really. And I agree with all the criticisms of the proposal that we've heard from other councillors, Councillor Langland, Councillor Barnes. Yes, all of these are absolutely valid. Unfortunately, what we're presented with here is a very stark choice, because what is actually the main reason why this site has become unaffordable is, on the one hand, the drainage systems, which Councillor Meir has described well, but also the factor of the 17.5% profit required by the developer. That is the real reason why we can't have affordable housing on this site. Without that 17.5%, we would be able to have affordable housing on this site. And so the long-term solution to this is to press ahead with our own housing corporation, not bothering so much about what it's going to be called, but bothering a great deal more about the speed with which it's set up, which at the moment is proposed to move at the pace of the snail on tranquilizers. And we've seen with COVID, we've seen that it's possible to move with some urgency. And that's what I think we need to do. So we have a stark choice here. The real choice is between this development with all its unsatisfactory aspects, all of which have been described very, very well, or no development at all. And that's the dilemma that the committee is going to have to face again and again. And so it is with great regret that I think that as this site is scarcely viable with 16 houses on it, it's quite clear that if we reduce the number of houses or we increase the size of the gardens, it's not going to be a viable site. So effectively, if we say no to this development, we're saying no to any viable development by a private developer. And so although I think that Councillor Meir has done a wonderful job, it is with great regret that if I'm faced with a choice between no development and this development, very reluctantly, I will go with the officer's recommendation and go for this development.
Thank you very much, Councillor Thomas. Councillor Mary Barnes, we have you back again.
Thank you, Chairman. It's an interesting thing. I wanted to come back on the garages, but I also wanted to ask exactly what we will be voting for, because the recommendation is to grant or is subject to completion of a Section 106 agreement. So that leaves us with, if we actually want to say we don't want to vote for it, what aren't we going to vote for? I mean, I'd like a bit, just to hear a definitive what is the recommendation. The second thing is just to say quietly that we do, of course, expect a developer to pay SIL on a garage. We've had a rash of lean-tos replacing garages, and garages actually are quite useful if you want to get rid of boxes of unwanted seasonal bits and pieces. So yes, I would like to see every garage that's attached to a house, and I do take your point, but it's, I was talking about the houses themselves, to see any garages actually stay in place. But first of all, what exactly is the vote going to be about?
Well, let me, hopefully Mr. Batchelor will correct me if I'm wrong, but you are voting on this application, which is an application for 16 houses without any affordable housing, and that's the difference which has occurred from the first time it was presented till now, because a decision notice has not been issued. Sam, is that correct?
Yes, Chairman, that is correct. And the only thing that is different than last time is that your resolution would be slightly different, because there's still 106 is still required, but for the highway and reptile aspects that I mentioned, and there are a couple of extra conditions just to cover my references to the housing policies that have been adopted in the DASA, and potentially the one about the garages that you mentioned earlier.
Are you happy with that response? Clarified enough? Thank you. Councillor Prochak, you put a note up referring to the NWPF. Did you want to speak about that?
Yes, I was applauding Councillor Langland for mentioning the environmental aspects, which we are now as a council hold in a different view on it. And the NPPF actually does talk about climate change. There are opportunities for actually addressing these sort of features in developments. Could I continue in the sense that?
Sure, yeah.
Is that all right?
Yeah, talking, yeah.
Looking back at the objections, I don't quite know what this developer is about, because if you remember, the first application was for 11 houses and 9 flats, for goodness sake. That was withdrawn. But if you look at the parish council's original objections, they're all things that we are now objecting to or we don't like. We're finding, well, the big one is the affordable housing, as Councillor Stevens has said. We all find that unacceptable. But then we've got this viability issue. But other things like the character of the area is not in keeping with the character of the area. Overdevelopment, density, the access. I think, and the Japanese knotweed, there's such a lot of issues here with this site. And I think everybody I've heard speak, apart from Councillor Thomas, says we don't want our hands tied on this one. It ought to go back to the drawing board.
Thank you. Councillor Coleman.
Thank you, Chair. The questions I'm sort of asking myself, weighing up in my head is, firstly, we have these gardens which are less than the recommended size. However, as Mr. Batchelor says, that's more of a guidance rather than a sort of definite policy. We have what I think could now reasonably be considered as overdevelopment. However, it is within sort of allocation, as Mr. Batchelor said. We have the fact that there's no affordable housing here. However, once again, it's been sort of suggested quite clearly in here that it's not viable. And so we have a case where we have an application with lower than standard size gardens, perhaps too many houses, and no affordable housing, which would usually be a pretty clear no from this committee in other circumstances, but with certain policies that seem to negate that. And so I think that's the thing that's weighing up in my mind is sort of how much weight we give those policies and those sort of exemptive parts of those policies. I also wanted to talk on the climate change thing, the same as Councillor Prochak, because actually the NPPF is quite clear when it comes to climate change. It actually says the planning system should support the transition to a low carbon future. It should help to shape places in a way that contributes to radical reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. I mean, it's in no uncertain terms quite clear on that. So it's not like until we implement the climate emergency that the climate's kind of just a vague thing that's mentioned. The NPPF is very clear in that section 14 that the planning system should be doing radical things to help stop the contribution to climate change.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So I'm just going to have Councillor Andrew Mear, have a final word. If you can keep it succinct, that would be very much appreciated. Then a quick wrap up, and I'll ask for proposals, really.
Mr. Chairman, we have allowed ourselves to become trapped by an obsolete density requirement, which has made the satisfactory development of this site impossible on the present proposals. I accept the principle of housing development on this site at a reduced density. Now, I don't agree with Councillor Thomas. We don't know how that will work out financially. It may be with fewer houses, more attractive houses, better garden areas, then those houses will sell at a higher price. It will also require less in the way of attenuation tanks and things which are not attractive to purchasers of that sort. The financial balance may well be to the advantage of the developer, and it may well be that some affordable element, maybe not 5, it might only be 1 or 2. It opens up the possibility of there being an affordable element in the development of this site, and a far better, far more attractive development. We have to remember we are building for the next 100 years. This is not something which can just be forgotten. It's going to be there in the long term. I accept the principle of development in Fairlight. There is another major site in Fairlight which has been allocated. We will have to discuss the details of that one on another occasion. Fairlight will change, Rother will change, Bexhill will change, but we have to do it right. And this particular proposal is not right, and it's not compliant with policy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, it's very clear that the committee is looking at this application with today's policies in mind, and they have changed over time, and the application has changed as well. There hasn't been a lot said in favour of the application. Councillor Thomas put forward some very salient points. I think I'm just going to ask somebody to put forward a proposal, really.
Mr. Chairman, I propose that this application be rejected.
I would second that.
So we have a proposer and a second for refusal of this application. I'm going to hand over to Julie Hollins to take a vote. So you're voting.
Sorry, Chairman, can I just interrupt? Do you mind?
You may interrupt.
I think members still need to vote on a specific recommendation. There needs to be planning. Sorry, my computer's talking to me. There needs to be reasons as they would be set out.
You would like them to articulate the reasons. It's absolutely correct. Councillor Meir, you propose it. Would you like to articulate the planning reasons for refusal, or do you want a few minutes to do that? Because I'm quite happy to adjourn for a few minutes while you articulate those for yourself.
I think the principal one is that it is non-policy compliant regarding the gardens. That is the case, and that it fails to address the affordability aspects which might be achieved by a better means, which is policy compliant.
So your two reasons are that it's not policy compliant on garden size and on affordable house delivery.
And I would also say policy OSS4, it detracts from the character and appearance of the locality, and fails on the grounds of providing sufficient space for children to play also.
Right, there we go. Okay, they are the reasons given for refusal. So once again, I'm going to hand over to Julie Hollins to take a roll call. Julie. Oh, sorry, Sam, did you want to respond one more time? You had a hand up.
If you don't mind, Chairman, I hate to, make it a sticking point. But this is something that comes up when we find ourselves in these situations. The reason for refusal, number one, that's relatively clear. We're talking about the garden sizes of those particular units. That's just a factual thing, so that's fine. The viability one, I'm sorry, there are two aspects of that that got mentioned there. One was that the application would be refused on viability because. Well, I'm inferring here because it wasn't said explicitly because the applicant hasn't demonstrated their case enough. And if that is what is being said, then I think we would need some additional reasoning behind that. But the other thing that I heard was that the viability is an issue in this scheme because it hasn't been tested with a lesser scheme or with a different scheme. And what I'd add in that respect is that's not a consideration here. You've got a proposal as it is, 16 units, and so a viability argument has been put forward in relation to that. So that wouldn't be a reason to refuse. But if it were to be because the viability argument had been demonstrated sufficiently, then that's fine, but I think that needs to be explained in a bit more detail. And then the reference to policy OSS4 and the impacts on character, apart from during the general discussion where I know there was issues around density that were raised, I think that would need to be expanded on a bit more significantly, so it was more robust.
All right.
Can I suggest that we do, Chairman, say that we have views on character and development which were probably not given sufficient account when this first came up. Now, we didn't give planning permission last time because it was never completed. I think we have a right to say that this is overdevelopment for the area. Not overdevelopment per se, but for the area in terms of its character and general recreational thing around children.
I think that you're more than happy to include that as a reason. I would like to go back to Sam on that, as well as the viability, because whilst there is a viability assessment being done, the fact is that has changed twice, and the application is simply not policy compliant in that respect, and we still have a housing list. So there is still a very useful purpose for affordable housing. Would you like to make a comment on both of those things, Mr. Batchelor?
Yeah, thank you. I don't disagree that the legal agreement wouldn't serve a useful purpose, but that's not the test. That's the test that you would apply whether one had been entered into in the first place. I can see the logic and the angle at which the argument is being approached from, but actually what we have here is an application where the planning permission hasn't been issued yet and is now accompanied by revised viability information. So, like I said previously, what I'm inferring from the discussion is that perhaps there is a suggestion that the viability argument hasn't been proven, and that's the issue here, because they have provided viability information which we have had assessed, and as you've heard from myself and Amy this morning, has been agreed with at officer level and by the independent assessors. So if you're saying that the viability argument put forward is not sufficient, then I think we would need some detail about why. And sorry, what was your other point, Councillor Vinehall? Was it around overdevelopment? Well, in terms of overdevelopment, I mean, I've raised it previously, but the application before you today was previously resolved to be approved in March 2018, where it was still subject to our the adopted core strategy, which we still use now. So the scheme has already been assessed against our core strategy policies, including OSS4. So coming to an alternative conclusion now flies in the face of that decision that was made previously. And there's a huge cost issue there for making an alternative decision when we've decided previously it's okay. I accept that our DASA policies have been introduced, but the DASA policies are informed by our core strategy. So where we might have specific policies now about landscape impact on the AONB, the housing ones that I've mentioned in the report specifically, the core strategy that informs those policies, because that's the overarching document, existed when we approved this previously. So if there was going to be a reason number 3 around character, so far there's been mention of density and recreational space. It's just a couple of issues, at odds with that previous decision where the same policies, at least in terms of the core strategy, applied. And I still have a concern around the wording, what specifically about the density is unacceptable, what specifically about the character makes it refusable. There's a policy reference now, which is great. So those are my concerns.
Well, I think we're looking at a combination, not a single issue. And so if any one of those single issues was the only issue, then then that might be a problem. But what we have is a combination of issues of overdevelopment and garden size and character of the space. No recreation space. In fact, it's taking away the only green space within the village, and it's not a brownfield site as you would imagine, hardcore and concrete and buildings. It's a market garden. So I think it's been misrepresented in that respect, unfortunately, not intentionally, just in a sort of a planning terminology. So, Councillor Mayor, would you like to consider? I mean, I'm happy to adjourn for a few minutes if you want to articulate it better or discuss a precise policy. Would you like?
Sorry, just before you cast Councillor Mayor, if you don't mind, is it okay just to maybe rephrase what I just said?
You can.
Well, yeah. So it's if anything, I just want you to reflect back on any training you might have had in this respect, and I think what I'm getting at particular is structure. If you take a vote on a recommendation that's put forward by committee members, it still needs to be clear and specific. And I think I'm just flagging up that whilst if we focus on this element of character, I think there are still issues around the viability. That is an acceptable thing for the committee to come to a conclusion about, as long as it's articulated properly. And so the structure is such that the development is unacceptable because of X, Y, and Z reasons, which cause A, B, and C harm, and having regard to whatever relevant policies it is. Now, in this instance, we're talking about OSS 4. We've mentioned density, but again, density is, and I think we've had discussions around this previously, is not a tangible thing unless you relate it to why the density as proposed here is bad. And similarly, overdevelopment, which is a similar term, has little meaning unless you say it's overdeveloped. It's considered to be overdeveloped because of these factors. So what are the factors of it that mean that it is in this instance? So it's just more about articulating good structure. So I can understand it, the applicant can understand it if that's the way that it goes, and the members are clear about what it is that they're voting on.
Kevin, it seems to me that we're getting ourselves hung up on the wrong tack. What we are doing is, once the affordable element has gone, the balance of advantage tilts. And it tilts because the factors that we disregarded in 2018, which are the character of the area, the appropriate density for that particular settlement, was outweighed in 2018 by the affordable element. Once you remove that particular tilt of the balance, you're entitled to take into account all the policies you disregarded last time because you favoured the affordable element.
Correct.
Oh, sorry, Councillor, I just have to chip in. I don't think that is correct, actually. The policies previously weren't disregarded. I accept that a balancing act was undertaken, but the scheme was explained in the report as being consistent with policies, however it was explained in that 2017 application. I accept that the circumstances have changed, that you are
so
now...
when you tilt a balance, you disregard certain elements, or you give less weight. Sam, all right, I'll accept you give less weight to them. But effectively, once you take the affordable element out, other elements increase in weight automatically.
Precisely. That is precisely the case. It's about weight. It's about weight of policy, and previously less weight were given to some policies and more to others. We're now having to review this in the light of that and as a fresh application. Yes, Councillor Mayor, to your proposal. So.
Well, yes, I was going to add, in respect of, I accept that things like density and overdevelopment are rather intangible concepts. In this particular case, the consequence of the overdevelopment is writ large in the inadequate size of the gardens and the lack of any space for children to play. So those are why I would say that it's overdevelopment. Those seem to me to be good policy reasons for a rejection of this scheme. And I would agree with Councillor John Barnes too in his analysis that the balance has now shifted. The things which were weighed in the balance were perhaps outweighed by the affordable element before, but we now know that not to be the case, and that we can look afresh at those other perfectly good material considerations.
So I think there are two things. I think there's the refusal as we see the application today, that those elements that are problematic come together to make the proposal to refuse placed on the table. And in addition, in looking at the application from its original form, why would you change the decision? And you change the decision because the affordable element has been taken out, and that is causing us to relook at the whole application and give weight to those policies which previously we, as a committee, reduced weight because of the significant affordable housing element. And I think there's your reason, Sam. I know you're probably going to struggle with that one, but I think that is the reason.
Okay, so just before you go ahead, and at least I'm clear, there's a reason for the number one relating to the gardens for those specific units. Sorry, I don't have the plot numbers to hand, but that doesn't matter. Then a second reason relating to character, which is summarised as being in conflict with policy OSS 4 and has poor density and overdevelopment, which is in turn leading to insufficient garden space and recreational opportunities. I'm still not clear about the viability matter.
Well, we're not referring to the viability matter at all, as it happens.
No, okay, fine. I will take that off then. Thank you.
Yeah, and so I'm going to hand over to Julie again.
Could I just, I've got my name down, Chairman. I just.
Oh, my apologies. I thought that was from a previous one. My apologies, Councillor Proch.
It's not easy, I know. But SRM1, can we also include that? Because we're a different committee, yeah? Time's gone on. The application was okay for the last committee, but we're in a different world now.
And just for the committee's sake, just articulate the detail of SRM1.
And you know, the low carbon future, I think, should actually now begin to be mentioned in our reasons for refusing anything, because as has been mentioned, there's no, I mean, there's no pavements in that road. Where are people going to access things, and the electric charge points, which people have mentioned. And I don't know whether Councillor Mary Barnes is also concerned about the access, because that was a problem before, and as has been mentioned, it hasn't really been assessed.
Well, as highways haven't can't make a proper comment, you're probably on sort of safer grounds in that there is no statutory consultation on it. Is that correct, Sam?
Sorry, Councillor Vinall, can you just repeat that? I broke up a little bit at my end.
There is concern that and a wish to include in this refusal that the access is not satisfactory because it has not, and that is a judgment of the committee, and because obviously highways are not in a position to comment on that, we're not putting ourselves up against a statutory consultee.
Yeah, sorry, I missed a bit about the access. I thought we were talking about policy SRM1.
Well, I think we've got two things came in together there.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah,
SRM1 is to say that the current policy, the current application does not appear to have any element of to bring it towards or contribute towards carbon neutrality.
Yeah, and I picked up the reasons for those, specifically talking about limited opportunities for walking and electric charging points. So yeah. Sorry, the second bit was.
And the second one is that there are still concerns on the access.
So My advice in that respect is, if you were going to refuse it on access, that is still within your gift, but obviously you'd have to provide specific reasons. And all that we have at the moment is that we know that in terms of the previous application and the assessment by the Highway Authority, that although there probably would be issues around adoption and the makeup of some of the roads in and around Fairlight, ultimately they had no objection, subject to some conditions. So if there was an additional reason about access, then that would be at odds with those comments previously. And it would need to be specific as well. What about the access is poor?
Did you want to progress that, Councillor Barnes, or leave the reasons as they stand? Councillor Barnes?
Sorry, Chairman. Yes, my concern really was the number of cars that will be coming in and going out of that. If the present number of houses stays the same, coupled also with the people using the garages.
All right. Well, I sense that may not be a substantive reason, given that it hasn't been really explored properly. Are you satisfied that the other reasons being given are sufficiently substantive?
Yes, totally. Yes, that's absolutely fine. This would just have been an extra bit.
Yeah, and I think you have to be careful. I think we all have to be careful. The objective is not to list a laundry list of reasons for refusal, because that can actually end up costing you more in the long run if there's an issue. So I think we're ready to take a vote. I think we are. So if I could hand over to Julie Hollins, please, to take a roll call. And I think after that we're going to have just a 5-minute break.
Okay, members, I will call your name out in alphabetical order, and if you could answer for, against or abstain. Councillor John Barnes.
I'm for refusal.
Councillor Mrs Mary Barnes.
I think that means against.
No, it means for.
No, we are voting, to be clear, you are voting of a proposal to refuse the application. So if you vote for, you are voting for a refusal. Of course, yes, of course.
Sorry, for.
Councillor Coleman.
For.
Councillor Errington.
Against.
Councillor Ganley.
Against.
Councillor Harmer.
For refusal.
Councillor Johnson.
For.
Councillor Langlands.
For.
Councillor Madeley.
For.
Councillor Mear.
For refusal.
Councillor Prochak.
For.
Councillor Stevens.
For.
Councillor Thomas.
Against.
Councillor Vinehall.
For.
That's 11 for and 3 against.
Thank you very much. So the recommendation for refusal is passed. On that note, I think we're all due a few minutes break, so I'm going to call a 10-minute break. I make it just 2 minutes to 11, so that'll make 8 minutes past 11 o'clock. And if you don't press the leave meeting button, just turn your cameras and microphones off, yeah? And we'll be back. Thank you, and we are now continuing the Planning Committee meeting of the 16th of July, and the next application that we're going to look at is not number 8 as listed because that was withdrawn. It is number 9, which is RR 2020-485P, and that is 1A Devonshire Square, flats 1 to 4. So if I could hand over to Sam to deal with that, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Jeff Pyra is actually going to present this one for you, so I will further hand over to him.
Jeff.
Thank you. Hi, morning, councillors.
Yes, could we have members' cameras on, please? Yep.
For some reason, I don't have the ability to share presentations on my screen.
Can one of the other officers share the appropriate things?
Mr. Batchelor, can you share? Sorry.
Yeah, I'll try and do that so we can get over the technical
have that privilege today.
Okay, just bear with me a moment, Jeff.
Okay. I can start just to introduce the application. So this application is for the replacement of 19 single glazed timber windows with UPVC double glazed windows. There's really one. I've been given a right to present. Sorry, I've been given an extra privilege. Are you doing it, Sam?
I'm just loading it up for you, Jeff.
Okay, fine.
So that should be showing now.
Yeah, that's great. So if you show the one with the windows, there's a drawing with the windows on. Okay. So so there's really one material consideration here, which is the statutory duty on planning authorities to pay special attention to the desirability of preserving or enhancing the character or appearance of the conservation area. So the first question here is, what is that character and appearance? And I think this is in the report, but in a nutshell, this is a conservation area that was built in a short time frame in the 1920s. Very much at Bexhill's heyday, the recognition of the benefit of seaside visiting and living, and therefore it's a conservation area with a lot of consistency. This part particularly with ground floor shop fronts, which would have all been timber, quite elegant, and I'm sure you're aware there are not that many of them left, but the ones that are there are very elegant. With flats above, and they're mainly brick built with timber sash windows. And whilst not many of the buildings on their own are of exceptional architectural quality, as a composition, as a whole, it has real quality, which of course is why it was designated as a conservation area. But it's worth noting it wasn't designated until 2004. So quite a lot of changes had already taken place, unfortunately, particularly to the loss of timber shop fronts and I'm sure changes to windows as well. So that's the context, and therefore the timber sash windows are an important part of that context. So you've got to assess what the impact of the loss of these timber windows will be and their replacement with the type of UPVC proposed. And so the report seeks to do that by breaking down the different elements, characterising those windows as they are and assessing the impact. And you'll see in the report there's 4 aspects. Number 1 is the textured timber finish. I'm sure you're all very familiar with timber sash windows. So you'll know that they're a painted finish. Because they're timber, there are always going to be some imperfections in those. And I think we can all read them as being timber. Whilst UPVC is always going to have a flat finish, it's non-painted. It can't be repaired or painted in the future. It is what it is. And I would suggest that is a different characteristic that UPVC just can't replicate. There certainly are appeal decisions where inspectors have upheld that view and have commented about the sterile finish of UPVC. So that's the first characteristic. The second one is slender profiles. Timber sash windows have a slender profile, partly due to the fact that they are single glazed, and partly because they can be bespoke made for the windows, and therefore the timber section is there to match and to hold the weight of a single glazed window. Whilst UPVC windows, they're pre-molded sections that are by their nature quite thick, so that they can be cut to fit different window shapes, and they are designed, certainly in this case, to fit standard double glazed section windows, which are much heavier, and therefore the sections, the sizes of those components of the frames are much larger. And I think that's very readable, very readily seen. And it also changes the ratio of glazing to timber to frame. The third issue is historic detailing. Timber windows have historic moulding details, which often aren't, and not in this case, replicated in the UPVC proposed replacements. And finally, the depth. Timber sash windows have a slim depth, therefore they sit elegantly in the window reveal, the brick reveal of the windows, which will be different for these UPVC windows because of the width and depth of the section. So if you deconstruct the issues, there are 4 characteristics that we feel just can't be replicated through these windows, and therefore the proposed windows will not preserve that key timber sash window characteristic of the conservation area. So that's the key issue. The applicant, I know, has talked about, or said in their application, the energy efficiency benefits of the UPVC windows. I think I'll be really careful about giving weight either positively or negatively to energy efficiency issues. It's really that historic issues that you're looking at here, and I think that is shown by the fact that building regulations exempt energy efficiency of windows from their considerations for listed buildings and conservation areas. And we've said this in the report in 7.3.3, only 4.8% of the UK's housing stock is in conservation areas. So so making that exception in a conservation does not have a large impact on energy efficiency, for instance, as a whole. Plus, timber windows, of course, can be repaired and improved, and secondary glazing and other features can be added to improve their energy efficiency, as can the energy efficiency and insulation of other components of a dwelling or a building. So I think that has to have limited weight. So the key consideration for you is the impact on the character and appearance of the conservation area, and our view is that will be harmed by this proposal for the reasons set out in the report, and therefore refusal of planning permission is recommended. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Before I go on, I should make note that some of you may have received a letter from Bexhill Heritage, which unfortunately was received after the close-off time on Monday, and therefore we are instructed to ignore. I'm not sure that there's anything in it that sheds any different light than has been talked about. So the first person we have to speak, first member, is Councillor Bayliss. Councillor Bayliss, are you with us?
Hello, yes, I'm with you.
Do you have a camera on?
Yes, I have got a camera on. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you, can't see you though, but hopefully we will soon. Okay,
I'm hoping that at some point, Julie's going to put some photos up for me. Okay, so why have I got involved in this planning application? Well, one of the residents of the flats that are involved, there's 4 flats and 1A Devonshire Square, got in contact with me, said that they'd lived in a building that hadn't really been really cared for a number of years. They've got a new landlord who bought the building, willing to invest in the fabric of the building. He's going to put new carpets, new internal decoration, and importantly for this guy, new windows. He asked for my support in terms of getting the planning application through, because it will increase the quality of his life, and significantly he felt it will reduce his heating bills, which he said at the moment are quite quite high because the windows are in a poor state of repair. They're single glazed and they don't keep the drafts and the cold out. So looking at the National Planning Policy Framework, I can see already that there is a section there on achieving sustainable development, and that this is a key section that we should take into consideration. But in planning terms, as Jeff has mentioned, we need to look at the appearance of the windows and whether they detract from the style or the appearance of the area. Now, the building, which is above Fox and Sons on the photograph, which is on the top left, the appearance isn't what I would call a building with architectural merit. It isn't listed. It's not a listed building. Indeed, we have. I've looked at previous planning approvals. In 2018, we approved in the conservation area some heritage style UPVC windows at both number 11 and number 12 in Marina, and those are pictures on the right hand side of the slide. Now this is a much more prominent building within the conservation area. As you can see, this is right opposite the Delaware Pavilion, and yet we approved this application in the notes of the meeting. It said, "It is this council's view that the replacement of timber sliding sash windows in UPVC can be supported in this case with the appropriate design, ensuring that the replacement windows replicate the design, appearance and opening mechanism of the original elegant windows." As I say, the council took the view and approved that design. I noticed in the paper that where we talk about case studies, we talk about a case study from Exeter, but I've got evidence here to prove that we're already approving UPVC sliding sash heritage type windows in Bexhill. So the final argument really is to go through the objectives of this council. We have an overarching objective to improve the private rented sector in Bexhill. It's really, really important for me as a ward member. We know that the previous administration commissioned a report into the state of the private rented sector, and we know it needs to be improved and developed. And I believe that you should refuse this application because it sends out the wrong sorts of messages to landlords. And finally, I wanted to bring up the case of the climate change emergency. So we can make all sorts of big policy declarations, but actually we're going to only achieve our climate emergency targets if we do stuff household by household across the district. And I think that these sort of decisions help us achieve our goals in terms of our environmental goals and our climate change emergency objective. So just to sum up, this is not a listed building. The proposal doesn't, I think, negatively impact on the conservation area. It does have Bexhill Heritage support with some conditions. Bexhill Heritage I've been in long conversations with them, and they're happy to support this application so long as there's some conditions around the design of how the window fits into the brick opening. And it supports our policies on improving the private rented sector and climate change. I want our planning policies here to be the driver and change that enable us to achieve our overarching objectives. And I hope that somebody on the committee will move an approval. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bayliss, and do please remember you've got a few words to say at the end or any clarifications. And I have Councillor Harmer who'd like to say some words. Yes, Councillor Harmer, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I must admit, I've read this report thoroughly because I've got this thing about windows and doors, and they are facade. They are what make a building beautiful or ugly. Personally, my own home, I wouldn't have had plastic windows, but budget was a factor, and we managed to find a solution which looked right for us. I was also surprised at Bexhill Heritage initially, thinking that they would be looking also at protecting our heritage. And as much as it's not a listed building and it is a conservation area, with my Bexhill Gets Creative head on, I think it's vitally important for regeneration that we encourage tourism. And in order for our tourists to come to Bexhill and see it at its best, we are looking at enhancing all the best of, as in the Edwardian features, and bringing other creative arts and things in. However, after seeing Christine's photographs, what's really important for me is that I completely understand and get people needing to be warm with these old-fashioned rattling, gorgeous but unrealistic windows. Plastic is the problem, but if there is a solution in, if you like, plastic, which is in keeping with the heritage type, I must admit I would be in favour of that, because you're pleasing everyone really, but I think style is vitally important. For me, this is a new thing. We've been dealing with housing developments and extensions and what have you, and this is quite a pleasure to actually have an input in something as important as what is adding to our town. What I would like to suggest at some point going forward is that we do discuss things like design on windows and doors, because they are very important to our town. And I really, really appreciate all the work the officers have done on this. I'm really impressed, and it was quite exciting reading for me. So instead of me voting against Christine, I'd probably support this, Christine, providing that the design and style is in keeping with the heritage style. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And before I move on to Councillor Langlands, I would just mention that all those sort of comments about the effect policy can be fed in through the questionnaire. Well, you've had the advanced version of that, but you can have another shot of that when it goes out formally. And I believe I'm told I've got Councillor Errington, but I see you up there. Councillor Errington.
Thank you. Just a few quick observations. First off, this would have been ideal for a site visit. I mean, you can, unless you stand there and look round, you cannot begin to appreciate what we're trying to do today. There's such a variety, and now that I understand it, the conservation area didn't come into effect till 2004. I can understand why we have such a variety of windows in Devonshire Square. So again, back to site visits. The second thing, I don't know whether Christine can answer this, has anything other than UPVC been looked at? Has aluminium, because that's a much slimmer profile, although it's probably double the price. I know that, like Councillor Harmer said, I could have had UPVC, but I've got white aluminium because of the thinner profile. So again, I imagine a lot of this goes into the fact that the 19 windows, it's a lot of cost, isn't it? So I don't know if there were any other options. I'm assuming not. The other thing that I'd like to say is that I think Devonshire Square, where it is, although it's not a prominent building, it is almost like the opening to Bexhill. If you came to Bexhill by train, you would come out the station, turn right, walk down Enwell Road. The first big open space you see is Devonshire Square, and this property is right slap bang on the corner looking up. That's just an observation. And finally, I'm sorry to go on, have we got any sort of log or register of replacement windows, so that if we do make a decision, we kind of do things consistently going forward? As Christine's pointed out, we've done something different in the past, right outside the Delaware. So yeah, whether that is possible or indeed relevant. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Errington. Yeah, unfortunately, we have to just determine the application as it is, and just rather than make suggestions, but certainly suggestions can form part of policy as we move forward. Councillor Coleman.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, I think throughout the MPPF and our plans, there's this talk about quality of life and improving quality of life through the planning system. And I think whilst there is obviously heritage considerations and considerations about character, I think when it comes to improving the quality of life of the residents inside, which having experienced both timber and UPVC windows myself in the past, I see as evident, or self-evident rather. I think that has a much heavier weighting in my view. I think, yes, the building you see when you come into Devonshire Square, and it's magnificent, as is our wonderful conservation area in Bexhill, but I don't think the windows are the first thing to draw your gaze, and I don't think I don't think the argument that it would affect tourism. I don't think tourists come into an area and go, "Oh, look at those windows." So I'm not sure that whilst we have to obviously consider them, I don't really think that they are the most pertinent part of that sort of heritage argument. Will UPVC windows, bearing in mind they have this heritage finish, so they look less like UPVC and much more like sort of Victorian or Edwardian windows, will they cause substantial harm to the appearance of the area? I don't think so. When you consider that other buildings nearby already have UPVC windows, it's not going to be something that looks completely different to everywhere else. And you could almost say that part of the wonder of the appearance is that there's the diversity of looks and stuff within that sort of style. I think we also have to take into consideration this environmental argument, and we heard in the previous application that it is quite clear in the MPPF about radical moves to try and lower our carbon emissions. And whilst the report does suggest that UPVC windows aren't the only way to improve energy efficiency and are by no means the most effective way, they still improve energy efficiency. And so if this applicant is looking to try and improve energy efficiency in the building, then I can't see why we should discount that just because they could do something else to the roof, or they could do something else to somewhere else. I mean, I think the MPPF has 3 objectives, it says in the planning department: an economic one, a social one, and an environmental one. And I think in this case, that environmental objective weighs far heavier than what would be very limited harm, if any, to the culture and to the appearance of this conservation area. So I think that's the view I'm starting to move towards. But obviously, I think we still do have to consider the fact this is a conservation area, and is UPVC right? I think it might be.
Thank you. Councillor Langlands.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I think there's a number of things. I did actually go down there because I thought I really do need to have a look, because I was a bit concerned that only an outside sort of site visit had been made, and as far as I could see, I couldn't actually see the seals and a number of other things to know the extent of the damage to them. It's sort of, the report implies it's just a paint job, but I actually think looking at it, it's a bit more. And when I went down there were several windows open that were actually being supported by metal strips, so that the actual sash didn't work either. Now, I have sashes in my house, and I actually feel that, the heritage of a building is really, really important, and the appearance of the windows. Having said that, I was looking at a book that Roger Hunt wrote that was on Old House Eco Handbook, and it's from the Society for the Protection of Ancient Buildings. And he actually said that retrofitting should be thought about holistically in terms of the whole building and the lifestyle of its occupants. And I think we really do need to look at the fact that these are flats for people. If this gentleman is happy, this landlord is happy to actually upgrade those flats in a sympathetic way, which it would appear that from the catalogue that he actually submitted in the planning, which was Eco Slide and Rehal Heritage, he'd actually thought about what needed to go in there, and the furniture on the windows, perfect, I thought. I just think that we need to give that a bit of consideration, and the fact that the people living there will find it easy to manage. The other thing I did find were the alternatives, because I think it's quite important to look at the alternatives. And no one's actually mentioned secondary double glazing, magnetic double glazing. And I was looking at this magnetic strip double glazing, and it is acrylic, it is brittle, and it isn't fireproof. So again, we're looking at something that isn't actually going to fit and suit the occupants of the building. So I think we need to take all that into consideration. I am again a bit upset that SRM1 isn't mentioned in the report. Somewhere along the line, we need to add environment into this, as particularly with this one, I think. And my feeling is that there are materials out there, there are windows out there that would look good. The in front of the building has plastic guttering, plastic drain pipes. It's got Sky TV thing. It is not exactly a building that conjures up a sort of conservation area view of it. And I think if he's going to try, we need to support him to get it right. And that whole corner will look good.
Thank you very much. I'm going to ask Jeff Pyra just to come in to respond to a couple of points that have been raised. Jeff?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, the first point, yes, we have approved a number of UPVC windows of this type in the last couple of years, and that's been mentioned. But, you know, of course, it's everything's going to be done on a case-by-case basis. I don't know all those cases, but certainly one of those ones on the marina, there was a long history of unauthorised UPVC windows and appeals refused for UPVC. And I think a compromise may have been reached where we did accept it in that case. And that's a small number of windows. We're talking about 19 windows here in a very prominent location in the conservation area. I can also say we have refused a large number of UPVC window applications for balance. We haven't just approved them. And in pre-application advice, we've often advised that the proposals, which happen to be UPVC, weren't acceptable, and therefore the applicant owners have taken a different route. So you've got to be a bit careful about looking at those too carefully. I think you've got to look at this one on its own merits, its prominent location in the conservation area, and the amount of windows that we're talking about here. It's great to hear, of course, that the landlord wants to invest in these windows, but they could invest in those by repairing what's repairable and replacing what isn't. And the great thing about timber, and I'd say this from a sustainability point of view, is that you can replace bits. You can splice in new bits of wood. You could add in slimline double glazing. You know, they're long lasting. They've been there a long time, and timber windows will continue to be there a long time and be repaired and updated. If any new product has a very large embodied carbon cost, so I mean, it's a very complex issue, environmental and climate change issues. I'm not suggesting I'm an expert, but I think you've got to be a bit careful about saying that because they've got a higher insulation value than the timber, that is a overall climate change benefit. But the key thing here is about assessing the impact on the conservation area. So I think I really recommend that you stick to that. We don't have a log of where these windows have been replaced, UPVC windows. I can't give you that. But what I would say is that, and I've certainly seen appeal inspectors mention this, just because there are other UPVC windows or other windows that are harmful to the conservation and have a negative impact, doesn't mean that you should allow more. In fact, just the opposite, because you're going to erode and lose the value of the conservation area. And if there are few examples of timber shop fronts or timber windows that are very characteristics of the conservation area, the more that the less of them there are, the more important it is to protect them. That would be my view. I think that was all the points I was going to raise.
Oh, thank you very much, Jeff. Very useful too. Councillor Mary Barnes.
Thank you, Chairman. My husband is here, will not be taking part in this item.
Thank you.
Yes, actually, I think that Jeff has just covered a great deal of what I was going to say, and I really commend our team on an absolutely excellent report. Really well put together and defines exactly what it is that we're hoping to do for Bexhill. And what we need to do is to remember that we are, this is a conservation area. We need to make certain that nobody points a finger at a UPVC frame and says, oh, what a pity they didn't actually repair the original. Now, I hear what Councillor Langlands was saying, but I have actually asked my son-in-law, who has fitted sash windows, wooden sash windows, and he maintains that properly fitted, the fact that they are single glazing makes very little difference, but there is no difference in the warmth. The difficulty with these windows is that they were fitted 120 years ago or thereabouts. And what will happen to a UPVC window over the same period of time, because once they've gone in now, folks, they're not going to be replaced in a hurry. They're going to weather badly. They're going to show signs of deterioration. You cannot remove a part of the frame as you can with a wooden frame. You can't scarf bits in. The appearance over time is going to be of something that looks really sad. I mean, I know we're talking about the fact that our officers could not get up to look at these windows, but they assume that a lot of it is really lack of maintenance. If this landlord is as caring as he seems to be, and obviously wants to spend money to bring the thing up to date, let him replace like for like. Let him put in the windows that were there originally with all the proper fittings, with the new sash cords, and with the necessary repairs done. I think it's absolutely vitally important for the future of Bexhill. Hey, we're all against plastic. What are we doing? Please, let's go back and have a look at what we should be doing properly, which is to make a really good job of repairing what there is, for all the very many reasons so eloquently described in the report about how elegant, how they fit beautifully. Let's have that all over again. This landlord is obviously keen to make the thing work. Please let him have a chance. Let him put in what was there originally. I can hear that when a tenant says, "Oh, please take these awful windows away because it's so drafty," the modern reaction to that tends to be, let's just get rid of what there is and put in something which we think is going to be better. This is not going to be better. This is not going to be the way forward. The way forward is to carefully repair and replace the bits that are wrong. And I am absolutely 100% against the idea of putting in these UPVC windows.
Thank you very much, Councillor Barnes. I think we're going to hear from Councillor Thomas now.
Chair, members of the committee, I'd like to, I think, agree with the arguments put by Councillor Mary Barnes and also by the officer Jeff Pierre. I respect the arguments put by Councillor Bayliss and Councillor Langlands, but I think they've been largely answered in 7.3.2, where the point is made there that the actual energy efficiency of secondary glazing can be superior to that of UPVC double glazed windows, and so that I think can answer the point about comfort and heat and so on. I think that point has already been taken into account by the officer. And if you look at the site Sussex in History today, there's actually a photograph today, very fortunately, of a very beautiful looking property with wooden frame windows, but with secondary double glazing. And that, I think, meets the objectives. What I think is most interesting about the conservation area, at least the Western Road part of it, is it isn't really a conservation area. in some ways it's a Contrig area, because the truth of it is that it was built, Western Road was built as a residential road, entirely residential, and it was still entirely residential as late as 1895. By 1905, we see some shops beginning to come in at the top of the road, but basically, as we have it now, with its shop fronts, it is about as genuine as the Taj Mahal. And I refer, of course, to the Taj Mahal in Las Vegas. What we have done here is we have constructed a history. That's the important thing. And once you construct a history, it has a way of becoming real. Nobody looks at Chester and says, oh gosh, that was done in the 19th century. Everyone thinks that Chester has this wonderful medieval shopping centre. But so that's what we now think of it as, Chester's medieval shopping centre. And we will think of Western Road in the future as the Edwardian centre of Bexhill. Now, if you're going to create an illusion, the important thing is to create that illusion consistently. I think it's not therefore just a question of the window frames, although I think if you look at window frames that are UPVC, in the photographs shown by Councillor Bayliss, which were taken in fairly dull light, the windows do not sort of shine. But actually, if you look at photographs of historic houses with UPVC windows, they do look dramatically out of place, notwithstanding the fact that the actual outline of them is very similar to that of the original windows. The sheen, the bright sheen on UPVC windows screams, I am a UPVC window. And there's no getting away from the fact that there is an inherent contradiction here between the Edwardian wooden shop fronts on the one hand and the idea of having UPVC windows at first floor level. And so I would urge the committee to say that the actual rather quaint impression created by Western Road, it's not just a matter of the windows, it's also a matter of the shop fronts. And it would be completely inconsistent to say, we want you to install wooden shop fronts at ground level, and then we're happy with UPVC windows at first floor level. That may do in Marina. That may be perfectly all right in Marina. But in Western Road, I think we should actually go for the wooden frameworks with the secondary glazing, as can be done. The other thing I've learnt from the planning training is this. I've learnt from the planning training that if we are to go against our own policies, there has to be a very, very good reason to doing so. And this applies whether it's the AONB or whether it's conservation areas. And so I think if we go with the policy here, we will move in time towards a situation where more and more places within Western Road hopefully will have the kind of windows that go with the shop fronts. So I would urge the committee to support the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. Councillor Mear.
Mr. Chairman, other councillors have covered many of the points which I was going to make, but I'll add one or two thoughts of my own. I had a house in London some years ago. It had been in multiple occupation and was in a very poor state. It had sliding sash windows. There were 12 pairs, and I restored every one of those pairs. So I feel quite strongly and passionately about the traditional sash windows. Of those 12 pairs, there was only one pair of sliders which could not be repaired, and they were replaced by a joiner. All the others could be made good and could be made to work well and without too much difficulty. So yes, they are very elegant, very beautiful, and to anybody mechanically minded, when you see the way that they're put together, they're very ingenious and a pleasure in themselves. So I would very much prefer to see wooden windows preserved wherever possible. I think the debate is probably going that way towards acceptance, but if it were to go the other way, there should be very stringent conditions. For example, the original windows here, many of them have a curved top to them. The brickwork is curved and the woodwork follows the curve of the brick. On the proposals, they're flat and straight. I don't think that's acceptable. The condition would have to be that they follow the outline of the existing window and the existing brickwork. The second would be that glazing bars on the bay windows would be correctly placed. And thirdly, that samples of the materials and the exact designs and types would be agreed with officers. I don't think we can just, go with this without stringent conditions. And I would just say, lastly, I went for a virtual stroll down Devonshire Road on Google Earth and looked up at the upper floor windows. There are some real horrors up there. There are some beautiful windows, and there are some real horrors, either wood or plastic or both. And there is a lot of scope for improvement. And I completely go with Mr. Pirra on this. We should be looking for the improvements, keeping things right, and improving where we get the opportunity. And that's how it should be done in a conservation area. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Thank you very much, Councillor Stevens.
Yes, as you all know, I live in a conservation area, Rye. I'm all for conservation and preserving what's there. I have a pub, a 200-year-old pub that has wooden sash windows, and they're repaired occasionally, and I have no problems at all, and they look wonderful. So I probably would go with your recommendation. Thank you.
Councillor Prochak.
Thank you, Chairman. It's interesting, isn't it, about Bexhill, because it was a really wonderful thing to get the conservation area, because it gave us the tools to get rid of some of the horrors. And so these are our policies. And I always remember one, it was De Paulo's, the balcony, it was metal, had rotted. And members really wanted to support it as a business and say, well, no, he didn't have to replace it. And we stood firm and we refused it, went to appeal, and it was refused on appeal. The balcony is now back and looking wonderful. Instead of like a gap in a tooth gap, it looks really good. And so, two wrongs don't make a right. The fact that we have got some things that some examples of horrors doesn't mean that we should accept more. And because I really do agree with the 7.2.4 that although the building is not listed, the legislative requirement to preserve or enhance the character or appearance of a conservation area relates to all buildings, whether they're listed or not. And this is what we're aiming for in Bexhill. We had a wonderful project in the good old days when we had some money, where we actually gave landlords and shop owners grants to actually do up their shop fronts. And if you walk around Bexhill now, you will spot them straight away. They are beautiful. Some wonderful examples of Edwardian buildings. And it's a pity we can't actually support this landlord in some way, if cost is the issue. But as has been so clearly proved, this is going to cost more in the end because they don't last. Also, I can also remember conservation officers saying that there are some grades of UPVC that you could possibly use in a conservation area, but they are more expensive than wood. And then it goes back to the issue about plastic. Do we want to actually encourage the use of plastic? So I would definitely support the officer's recommendation here.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll just sort of interject for a moment. We do have 4 more people who'd like to speak, and I think it's fair that they say what they'd like to say. We do have a proposer for the recommendation and a seconder in Mary Barnes and Jeanette Stevens, but we do have a couple of people that I feel it's only right they should speak. Can I sort of go past you, Councillor Harmer, because you've spoken already, and just go to and also Councillor Coleman, and just go to Councillor Madeley next.
Thank you, Chair. I feel very privileged. Yes, I've lived with good old sash windows all my life, and if looked after, as Councillor Mary Barnes says, if looked after and maintained well, will last lifetimes, and I mean lifetimes. The average UPVC window has a 10-year guarantee, and in many ways doesn't last very long at all, particularly when the twin glass gets blown and you try and get that replaced, it's impossible. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Ganley.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Actually, most of what I was about to say has already been covered. The fact that it doesn't last has just been covered. And and as has been said, you cannot repair plastic. You have to rip out the whole thing and take it down to Bedford dump. And that just adds to our load of waste. So I fully support those councillors who have spoken in favour of the officer's report recommendation.
I'm going to do two things. I'm just going to have Councillor Coleman and then Councillor Bayliss finish up, and then there has been a recommendation moved and seconded, so we'll vote on that. Councillor Coleman first, then finally Councillor Bayliss.
Thank you for letting me speak again, Chair. I wanted to read a few bits of the MPPF out that I think are really pertinent to this before we do make our decision. Paragraph 127 in Achieving Well-Designed Places, Part C says that planning policies and decisions have to be sympathetic to local character and history, including the surrounding built environment, while not preventing or discouraging appropriate innovation or change. And I think that capacity for innovation and change does need to be considered. Then in part F of that same section, it talks about a high standard of amenity for existing and future users. We can't simply preserve something with no consideration for the future quality of life for the existing and future users, and I think that needs to be considered also. I think paragraph 148 of section 14 says we should be supporting a transition to a low carbon future, radical reductions in greenhouse emissions, and conversion of existing buildings if necessary to preserve that environmental argument. So I think that needs to be considered. And there are also a lot of things about quality of life. As I've mentioned, a few points I wanted to pick up on. Councillor Thomas mentioned the sheen on another example of UPVC windows, but I don't know that the UPVC windows Councillor Thomas was referring to have this this vintage styling to it that makes them look more in keeping with the area. And this thing about plastic, I know in terms of the environmental impact, plastic is not seen as a positive thing, although of course plastic contributes very little to climate change in the global scale of things. And actually, one of the reasons that plastic is so damaging in some eyes is because it lasts. Plastic lasts, and I just foresee a situation where the timber frame needs repairing and the landlord, for whatever reason, can't repair it straight away, as happens quite often in these sort of properties, and the resident is left with a cold and drafty property. These properties across Devonshire Road, yes, a lot of them have these timber windows, but also we know that the majority of these houses and these properties are in appalling states and conditions and are not, in my view, fit to live in. So I really do think we should focus on the quality of life aspect here. And I think that's everything I need to say. I do hear what other councillors are saying in terms of the conservation area, and it is a tough one, but I just think we do need to pay some heed to quality of life before we make that decision. Thank you, Chair.
All right, thank you very much. I've actually got two ward members to speak, because Councillor Cortell as a ward member would like to speak, and then I'll have Christine Bayliss finish up. Councillor Cortell.
Thank you, Chair. I think the critical issue is that Bexhill Heritage support this development, provided there are conditions that make the windows in keeping with the local environment. I've lived in a flat with double glazing, and it's not great. There are great contrasts of heat and cold. I now live in a flat with UPVC, which was installed 20 years ago, and none of the windows have blown, and they are still very well maintained. I think the Councillor Coleman mentioned the economic, social, and environmental objectives, as was mentioned to us in our training. Certainly, this proposal reduces heat loss. It's also it addresses an environmental objective. it also addresses an economic objective in terms of the general comfort of the residents and their reduced cost of heating, and it addresses a social objective in the same way. So we're talking about a better environment for the residents, less cost for the residents, and a climate change contribution. And on that basis, I support the development proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you very much, Paul. And finally, Christine Bayliss, final words.
Okay, I just wanted to pick up a couple of things. Jeff mentioned earlier about this building being built in the 1920s. I think Councillor Thomas said it was sort of built in the late 1890s. It was sometime between 1895 and 1905. The other point to make is about the conservation area was actually designated in 1992 when I was last a councillor for Central Ward, and I was one of those councillors that was instrumental in calling for the conservation area. But you know, there has to be a balance here between what we, you know, our wider objectives and, you know, conserving at all costs. And I would urge members of the planning committee to think about that. In terms of consistency, if you walked down Devonshire Road, you will find that a third of the buildings have got ugly slab type UPVC windows. This will be a definite improvement and will set the standard, if you like, on replacement windows down that particular road. And you know, I don't see how we can ignore that we allowed a prominent building on the seafront within the conservation area to have these type of UPVC windows in less than 2 years ago in 2018, and then we're turning down this application. So I would feel that, you know, the applicant will definitely, I'm almost sure, go on appeal for this. You know, we will have to defend the fact that we've allowed previous applications, and also that we don't enforce what's there. You know, if this is what if members feel this strongly about the conservation area and UPVC windows, let's get out there and start doing some enforcement, planning enforcement, because people are changing their windows without fear or favour of being brought up. So that's my final word. I would just hope that members will approve this application and not refuse it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bayliss. Well, there's been a lot of discussion, and I think we all know a lot about UPVC windows and climate change and the impact of plastic versus wood and the repairability of wood and the other options that an applicant might consider. I would also add about conservation zones that different conservation zones are listed as such for different reasons, and you may not have UPVC windows, for example, in a village of a conservation. My own in Settlescombe, the whole area is a conservation zone and listed. Yet we make a decision at some point on the seafront in the conservation zone with UPVC windows. We also see a number of the shops along the same road with UPVC windows which have been put in without planning approval and with no enforcement. I wrote on my notes here, 2 wrongs don't make a right. I also heard the same words from the head of planning, and that's true. And we have to consider also the street, you know, is the area a conservation zone in a single piece, or is it the streetscape? And has that streetscape now changed to such a degree that actually UPVC windows has become part of it as well? I think these are other things that need to be considered. Is it the overall look of the street or the specific elements? And how do those specific elements come together to create that overall look, particularly when you have changes already? So if this applicant had simply just changed the windows without seeking planning permission, would we have enforced that? And then would we lose on appeal? I think these are real questions, and I'm, you know, I found myself quite quite split over the process here. Personally, I like wood windows. I have properties that have a combination of both, and it does look a bit odd. So they're the sort of questions that you need to think about: the purpose of a conservation area, and the purpose of the individual elements within that conservation area, and what would be acceptable. Would it be acceptable to have plastic windows at the back of these buildings where they can't be seen? Are we protecting the building, or is it a visual issue that we're discussing here? These are the questions that we need to really consider, and there have been some good, strong arguments in every sense. I think everyone has some personal experience of the different types of windows. So we have a proposer in Councillor Barnes and a seconder in Councillor Stevens for accepting the recommendation, which is one of refusal. And on that basis, I'm going to hand over to Julie Holland to take a vote.
Okay, members, I will call your names out in alphabetical order. So you need to say for, against or abstain. So Councillor Mrs Barnes.
For.
Councillor Coleman.
Against.
Councillor Errington.
Sorry, for.
Councillor Ganley.
For the recommendation.
Councillor Harmer.
For.
Councillor Johnson.
For.
Councillor Langlands.
Against.
Councillor Madeley.
For.
Councillor Mear.
For.
Councillor Prochak.
For.
Councillor Stevens.
For.
Councillor Thomas.
For.
And Councillor Vinehall.
For.
That's 11 for and 2 against.
Thank you very much. So the recommendation is passed. And that takes us on to the next application. I should make a note just before we finish on that one. It's not an issue for this planning committee, but I would dearly like to see some form of a grant offered to help promote the conservation area. So maybe that's something that could be taken up in another part of the council. The next
Chairman,
one is
Chairman.
Yes.
Could I have my abstention recorded, because I wasn't able to see all the discussion, which is why I didn't vote, but I was present for part of it. So could I be recorded as abstaining?
You certainly can. So we'll move on to the last application, which is RR202048-5-P, and this is Catsfield Covered Side, Powder Mill Lane. Could we have the office presenter, please?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. That will be me again for that one. Just loading up the slideshow for you. Can someone confirm when it's available?
We have a phone ringing in the background.
Not mine, unfortunately.
I can see it now.
Excellent. Okay, I'll continue then. Yes, as explained in the report, this is a variation of condition application for a planning permission that dates back to 2016, which in itself was a planning permission for a replacement dwelling. So just to go through the slides here then, this was the scheme as it was originally approved. Effectively 2 stories, because some accommodation would be in the roof space. You can see some quite substantial, or there's some dormer windows included in the scheme anyway. And that there'd also be this link garage area, which, if I use my highlighter, would be this building here. Then the scheme was amended in 2018. Again, not substantially. It looks very similar. There's some differences, I think, in terms of the fenestration details and some of the detailing on the house. Oh, sorry. And then this is the plan that we have for the garage building now, which is now detached from the building. And you can see that on this block plan here. I will try to zoom in ever so slightly. Hopefully that's a little clearer to members. So that's the building, the main dwelling house building, and this is the outbuilding garage building that's now shifted. These are some photos that the applicant provided to the case officer. So these just show the boundary along the property that's neighbouring next door, which is called Byways. So that's essentially where the garage building will be located. That's another picture, similarly, kind of a similar view, similar orientation. And then this is another view of that boundary. Essentially, the photos are just there to show you a kind of general idea about where the scheme would be located, but also what the boundary treatment is like, so you can get an idea of that separation between the two properties, so that you can appreciate the recommendation that the officer has come to in their report, saying that there would be no harm from these amendments, and that includes to the remaining tree at the front of the property, which again, going back to the block plan here, the proposal would be outside of the root protection area of that tree. So the recommendation is for approval.
Thank you very much. I should just make a little comment. In fact, on the agenda, this is listed as 485. It's actually 458. The numbers have been transposed. Otherwise, it looks like the previous application, which is actually 485. So would anyone like to speak about this application? Is that John Barnes putting his hand up rather than putting a thing in? Is that what you're doing? Yeah.
Our button wasn't working terribly well. The one condition which I think is, and I just want to be sure that it's included, is this would be covered by a tie of this garage to the house. So long as that's covered, I can't myself see any great objection to the officer recommendation. But I do think the section 106 here is quite important, and we do need to make sure that that is in.
Thank you very much. Did you want to comment on that, Sam?
Yeah, I'd actually need to just quickly check the original plan permission. There is no 106 proposed, but I can just check, because we are intending to keep conditions 1 and 3 to 9 from the original consent. So if you just bear with me a moment, I'll be able to confirm if one of those talks about the garage being linked to the property. Otherwise, such a condition would be acceptable. Just bear with me.
In paragraph 10, it's got a new condition on page 69.
And that prevents.
And thank you. Yeah, thank you, Councillor Prochak. That's exactly what I was trying to find. So it wouldn't have been on the original consent. It's actually a one that the officers added additionally. So yes, to address Councillor Barnes, there's a condition linking the garage building as ancillary to the house.
If I have nobody who wants to speak about this, then would somebody like to propose the recommendation, which is for approval?
I can propose it, Councillor Prochak.
Okay, and could I have somebody seconding it?
Second, Councillor Ganley.
Thank you. And Julie, could I hand it over to you for a roll call?
Okay, members, I'll call your names out in alphabetical order again. You need to tell me for, against or abstain. Councillor John Barnes.
For.
Councillor Mrs Barnes.
For.
Councillor Coleman.
For.
Councillor Strington.
For.
Councillor Ganley.
For.
Councillor Harmer.
For.
Councillor Johnson.
For.
Councillor Langlands.
For.
The Maidley.
For.
Councillor Mear.
For.
Councillor Prochak.
For.
Councillor Stevens.
For.
Councillor Thomas.
For.
Councillor Winehall.
For.
That's unanimous, Chair.
Thank you very much. That takes us on to the next item, number 11, which is the Ministry of Housing's comparative planning statistics, and I'm not sure if Mr. Hickling or Mr. Batchelor is going to just cover these off.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Members will recall from the last committee that committee requested the Ministry for Housing statistics that are reported from Rother in terms of our performance on 3 indicators of speed of decision with major, minor and other applications. So the report covers the latest figures the government have and compares that with the authorities across East and West Sussex, and also those authorities in West Kent, so the authorities like Ashford, Folkestone and Tunbridge Wells, which are border rather to the east. So the first 2 blocks essentially are the quantum, i.e. the number of applications that we've processed during 2019. That's not all the decisions we've issued, because we have a number of decisions such as listed building conservation area, prior notification applications, which are not included in these statistics. And indeed, if you include those statistics, the amount of decisions we issue is near on 2,000 decisions. So that gives us the actual amount of work. And then on the following page, you have your 3 specific indicators, the majors, minors and others, as I said, in comparison with those authorities. And for your information, in each of those categories, we are already meeting our own KPI requirements. So for majors, our target is 80%, and we've reached 86%, I think it is. And then on minors, our target's 75, and we reached 82% in 2019. And on others, which includes all the domestic extensions applications, our target was 80, and forgive me, what we actually achieved was 89%. So that gives you an indication where we sit with our neighbouring authorities. I'm happy to take any questions on that report. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Any questions from members? I think they're pretty self-explanatory results. We need to resolve this, but we can just do it by proposing and seconding unless anyone's got an objection. Do we have a proposer and a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Prochak, and a seconder.
Seconded.
We have a seconder. I'm not quite sure who that was. There's 2 people at once. Could I just have that seconded again, please?
I think Councillor Ganley seconded that, okay.
Oh, that's all right. Thank you very much. And finally, we have the appeal decisions. Are there any questions on those? I think that there's a thought that perhaps as these come along, particularly where the appeal has been allowed, that we might in the future have a look at a couple of these to see, regardless of whether it's officer or committee, as to why the appeal was allowed, just to give us a bit of learning, but we won't do that today. So does anyone, sorry, Councillor Prochak?
Yes, I'll just thank the officers for putting whether it's delegated or committee decision. So on page 73, maybe one of the things we should look at is the Mountfield one, which was a committee reversal, and see what happens with that one.
Yes, that would be very interesting. Perhaps, Sam, you could note that for when that comes through and we can look at that.
Noted.
Yeah, that would be good. I think that's that would be very useful learning for all appeals. So once again, I just need a proposer and seconder, unless anyone has some form of objection to the report.
Proposed, Ganley, Councillor Ganley.
Thank you, and seconded by?
Sam Coleman.
Sam Coleman, Councillor Coleman, thank you very much. And that is that for our meeting today. I'm just going to ask members to stay on after it goes offline for a couple of minutes, just to have some input on site visits, because a number of people have mentioned this to me, and I think we need to talk about it and have some quick feedback. So, Julie, I think the meeting is complete. If you could tell us when we are now not being live streamed.